Welcome, everyone. My name is Mark Fustel. I'm an independent curator, writer, and editor, and a member of the team that organized the Artist Talks by the Eyes. So for our final hour of talks today, I have the pleasure of speaking with three artists. These three talks are going to be in English. I'm going to be speaking with Abdul Kircher, Debbie Cornwall, and Leah Dias about their latest books. So please join me in welcoming Abdul Kircher. Welcome, Abdul. So Abdul is born in Berlin to German and Turkish parents, but at the age of 8 moved to the US with his mother. And this is not just random biographical detail, but relates to the project as well. Abdul is a graduate of the School of Visual Arts and has an MFA from the University of California, San Diego. And this book, which you may have seen the title, is Rotting from Within, which is published by Loose Joints. It's his first book and has also been nominated for the Paris Photo Aperture First Book Award. So the results of that will be announced tomorrow. And so what we're seeing are the pages of the book that are scrolling through in the background. This is quite a huge volume. There's a lot of images. It's a huge project, and I wanted to ask you, even though this is your first book, and I understand that this is a book that is made up of almost a decade of photographs. Is that right? Can you tell us a little bit how this project first started?
Can everyone hear me? Yeah, it's fine? Okay. I mean, the work started very intuitively because it began when I first started, like when I first picked up the camera and started making photographs. And I think it started from a very pure, intuitive place. Like, you know, it was around the same time that I sort of rekindled with my father, and he was reintroduced into my life, and it felt like it was this sort of vessel that allowed me to spend time with him. And you know, obviously I knew, you know, my dad went to jail for really bad things and did terrible things to my mom and my family. So I knew going into the relationship the type of person he was, but I still felt like that was something I needed to experience and, you know, make sense of. And the camera to me was this sort of way to try to understand and try to make sense of it all. And it started, you know, with just documenting my father selling drugs, you know, the people he was selling drugs to, women he was around, all these things that felt very like, how do you say? They made him look very glorious, and it made him, it sort of put him on an interesting pedestal that I wasn't trying to, but it was something, I don't know. It was, yeah. And over time, I just, you know, our relationship sort of turned sour at some point, and I turned way more to my family to try to make sense of, you know, it felt like I wasn't getting anywhere with him when I was talking to him about my feelings, about our relationship. And, you know, over time, I realized that I would never get anywhere with him, and that I needed to turn to my family, the people that raised him, the people that he grew up around, to try to make sense of him. And, you know, I feel like it's a sort of lifelong journey, and this is something that's, I see as like a first chapter almost, because at the end of the day, it is my family, it is people I see all the time. And yeah, that's sort of the premise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that that gives us a sense of, you know, the very personal nature of this book. And, you know, the images are not exclusively, but heavily focused on your family, on your father's world. And so, if I'm right, you you were a teenager at the time when you redeveloped. I mean, when he was released from prison and when you started this journey.
Yeah.
And you were, I guess, sort of learning photography as you were getting to know your father.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the sort of visually. It's very. There's a lot of things happening visually within the book that is also so beautiful. Like, in the end, we decided to make the book loosely chronological because there was the way I was seeing things, the cameras I was using, the film I was using. I'm grateful that the whole time I was using film, so there's some consistency there. But in terms of camera and equipment, I know we don't like to talk about these things a lot as photographers, but I feel like it's so important, especially within this work, to see how my eye changes as I understand things differently, as I understand my family differently, as I become an adult, as I have responsibility, whatever, all these things that really change the way I see the world and the way I approach the world visually. And I feel like that's so evident as you progress through the book. So I feel like there is a lot of things happening, but I feel like you also see myself like evolving visually. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting aspect of the book. That was a question that I had wanted to ask you was, we're not told when these images were taken, and the book there isn't a sense of that we're following a very kind of specific narrative throughout it, but it is interesting that you had this kind of deliberate chronological sense of both the story you're telling, but also of your own kind of development through your approach to photography. The book, as we've seen, includes color images, black and white images. There's a real diversity of types of imagery in this book. And as we've said, it also is almost a decade's worth of pictures. At what point did you feel like this project was mature, was ready to turn into a book? Or, I mean, you've said that this is a first chapter, so I don't know if you think of this as a work in progress, but at what point did you feel like you were ready to turn this into something? That
question is always like, I think about a lot, because I feel like when I was younger, I was always the one thing I always asked someone, like a photographer that was older, I was like, how do you know when something is done? Like, and they'll always be like, oh, you'll feel it when it's done. And it, like, at the end of the day, I feel like it's so true. And with this work particularly, it felt like I had a show, my first solo show in Berlin this summer with Carly Gebauer, and in my hometown, and it just felt like this very full circle moment. All my family was there, my dad, my grandma, my cousin, everyone in the images was there, and it just felt like I had hit this sort of stagnant point with my father where I sort of made peace with the person he is and the way he treats me, and it just felt like I sort of hit this wall where I didn't know. Like, I'm still obviously going to be making photographs of him and my family and all these things, but it felt like our relationship hit this sort of stagnant space where it just felt like it was time to put this thing out that had been weighing on me for, a decade. So it really just felt like with the show in the works and then with the book, it just felt like it was time to finally release something into the world. And I think it was really difficult for me to put out a book because in a way the book feels so like solidified and so physical and final because it lives out in the world. Like with the show, it comes down and then the only thing that lives are the photographs of the installation and then that's it. But I'm
And I mean, for a project, a first book, first of all, it's always a challenge for any photographer. But a first book that is so personal and that tells a very difficult story. Like, how much did you get help in terms of editing? What was the process like for? Yeah. Even though the book contains a lot of images, I imagine that there are many hundreds or thousands more. Yeah. So, how did that process work?
Well, my partner, who's not here today, Zoe Bullock, she was when I met her. about 5 years ago, like prior to meeting her, I'd already been making this work, but she was the first person that sort of like really allowed me to open up to her about just my feelings surrounding my father, her also having issues with her father. And it just felt like I finally met someone that understood me and that like understood the way my brain works and the way I see things. And yeah, so basically as time went on and I went to grad school, that was really the space where I started actually sitting down with the work, because I've been making it, but I lived in New York. I had my room in my parents' house. I didn't have a space to look at the things, and everything was shot on film, so I just had boxes of negatives. And so by the time I was in grad school, I finally felt like I was in a place to like have a studio, I could have a wall to put things on. And then with her support and her helping me sort of work through things, and I had been keeping a diary the whole time that I spent with my father over the decade. Like there was a diary. I was thinking about things, but I wasn't thinking about what does this work mean? What is this work trying to say? What am I doing? And it felt like when I went to grad school and met her, I finally had the space to open up and think about these things and really like go to a dark place in order to like figure out what is happening. And yeah, so then the editing, I mean, like you said, there's like hundreds and hundreds of rolls of film. And then I remember coming to Loose Joints with this insane edit of like 600-700 images. And they're like, we can't, like this was my sequence. Like I covered in my room, I had covered all the walls in metal, and literally with like little CVS prints, like little 4x6 prints, I covered the entire place. And I remember coming to them with this edit, and they're like, we can't make this into a book. Like, it's way too many photographs. And so that's how the sequencing, then I went to Marseille, and we sat down and really dig through all these physical prints and try to make sense of it. And we ended up creating these sections in the book that are almost function as chapters, and that, like with the black background, where there's a lot of images and clusters happening. And those function as there's 4 chapters, and each one sort of is about this shift in the relationship with my father and the things I'm focusing on. Or it could be, like me focusing on my grandparents' home in Turkey and just living with them on the countryside. And my dad sort of, it's a lot to dig through, so I don't expect anyone to have noticed this, but if you look in the book, my dad disappears for a long time in the images. Like, you don't see him throughout the middle of the book, and then he sort of reappears by the end. And that was, like, I was just thinking reflectively of, like, in the edit, how can I make something that feels reflective of the relationship with him and I, and how the ebbs and flows sort of happen throughout the years. And, yeah.
Yeah, these talks are always very short format for, a project that is 10 years of your life and that is such a dense book. It's difficult to get really deep into it. But you were speaking about the collaborative. Your partner played a role in this project. And one of the elements I found that was striking was there is a text section at the end of the book in which you include a few of your diary entries from, from over the years, so one gets a sense of this evolution. But there, not only is there that, but there are also like her annotations where she's kind of almost explaining your state of mind or, certain situations. I was really struck with the very final entry that there is in the book. And so I'm quoting you here. This is an entry from December 2023. And it reads, "I truly hate photography and what it has done to my brain. I wish there was a way for me to erase it from my existence." These are, really, it's very, very difficult relationship that you have with photography and with this material. And I just wanted to know, now that this project exists in the world, now that you have had, shown this exhibition, like, what is your relationship with photography feel like now?
That I mean, you know, the work is what it is because of who I am and how I see the world and how obsessive I am, and I feel like it you know it comes with the good and the bad, like, and I feel like it's something like I still struggle with, and um, I feel like it at some point it took over my brain where it felt like I was just so addicted to making photographs that I didn't care about people's feelings. I didn't care about boundaries. I didn't care about a lot of things that I should have cared about. And I feel like that entry came at a time where I thought, because as I got older, I thought I had sort of worked it out of my system, that frame of mind. And I thought I had sort of made peace with it. So that entry was really like, it was like the lowest I've ever felt in my life, because it came back, and it came back so strong, this obsessive nature. And without going into detail, yeah, I just felt like it was, it feels like a sickness. I don't know, it sounds really dramatic and like it, but yeah, so even with the installation and creating this 35-foot wall by 15 feet, like it was like, those are ways for me to show that obsessive nature. Those are ways, like the book having over 300 images, that's ways that I can sort of elicit these feelings, that overwhelming feeling that I feel. Like, how can I make the viewer feel that same thing? And I feel like that's such a big part of the work, and just of my work in general, is like that obsessive thing is what makes me, but what also like torments me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being so open about this, and I think it also speaks to the fact that photography is, and I think maybe we are not all dealing with the same kind of subject matter, but the addictive nature of taking images is something that I think all of us experience in some sense. So we have maybe time for one question from the audience.
Thank you for showing so much emotion in front of so many people. I think that's not so common, especially in the background of the project being about masculinity. And you touched on the point that the project is very personal to you, and it shows a lot of you reacting in that way. Even now, after the book is published, it shows that emotions and your introspection is a really important point in how you use photography. And I wanted to know how you went about communicating that inside feeling to the people who view the book, because I can relate to the point of trying to communicate what's inside of you through photography, and that being sort of obsessive. And you touched on it shortly by the book having so many pages and the wall being so big and with also so many pictures. But how did you go about translating that emotional word in photography?
I think I try not to even think in that way, because I feel like that's where the work loses its powerfulness. Like, once you try to make it into something or into this idea that you really want to elicit, I feel like that's where you lose people, and that's where the magic sort of gets lost. So I feel like at the end of the day, all the things I made, all the ways that you see it is because of the way I process the work, the way I see the work, and it's all from my point of view. So I'm never like, anything that's being put out into the world is for myself, and that sounds really selfish, but like, to me, that's the only way to put something out there that feels, I guess, somewhat pure and true to myself. And yeah, I feel like all these feelings that people are having when looking at the thing like that, I'm super grateful for that, but that wasn't something I was thinking about when I'm putting the sequencing together or putting the installation together. Like, it's very much just like a reflection of me, and then all these feelings that come about, like, I feel like that, yeah, I don't know. I feel like that answers the question.
I think it does. Abdul is going to be signing copies of Rodding from Within at the Loose Joints booth tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. Their booth is L05. And I would also invite you to go to the Kalia Gebauer booth D24 downstairs to see the installation of the work of the prints that Abdul has been talking about. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.